On Capitol tonight. A national group is pushing New York to toughen its laws regarding child sexual assault. The group is called Stop Child Predators. They've actually come up with a draft of legislation that they would like all 50 states to adopt. It includes penalties for offenses committed against children. My next guest has been asking district attorneys for their support today. Stacey Rumenap joins me to explain. Nice to see you.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
You actually just came in from Cooperstown.
I did, yes.
Where you were lobbying the DAs.
I am, yes.
And I would expect that the DAs are probably pretty bullish on this, right?
They are. I would say that there was a lot of support in the room and that there's a lot of concern in the room. Anytime you start talking about mandatory jail sentences for any type of perpetrator, it's going to raise some eyebrows and there's going to be some concerns over that.
Do you guys start out at a very conservative position in hopes of negotiating to a middle ground, or are you? I mean, what you are proposing is very strict.
It's very strict,
yes.
And I'll tell you, we teamed up with Mark Lunsford, Jessica Lunsford's father, 6 years ago, and we have been traveling the country. We have passed versions of Jessica's law in 44 states. We're here now in New York and New Jersey, 2 states that we have been working in for many years. But what we have learned along the way is sometimes when you ask for everything, 25 years to life, electronic monitoring, residency restrictions, and the list goes on, sometimes that's a negotiating point. Sometimes that's our starting point.
Well, because we're talking about a Democrat-dominated government with the exception of the state GOP. And this has not been a focus. Many years, in the wake of Jessica Lunsford's disappearance, kidnapping, etc., Mark Lunsford came up to the Senate.
Yes.
And I remember standing in the Senate conference room speaking. At the time, Joe Bruno was the majority leader, and it was a big push for them.
Yes.
Off the table, however, with Casey Anthony, even though it was not a child predator situation, are you expecting that this gets back into the focus on the front burner?
Absolutely. Sadly, it takes a tragedy to get lawmakers, to get law enforcement, parents, victims, everyone involved in the process, to get them to come together to pass a tough law. We recognize that what we're asking is tough, but these types of crimes are so horrific that we're saying someone has to take a stand for our nation's children. Whether you're in New York, New Jersey, or out in California, we need to make sure that our kids are safe at all times. This is one way to do it. We know that when predators are preying on our nation's children, our communities aren't safe. And so we're asking the lawmakers to look at a tough, controversial bill that's very emotional to try and protect kids from being harmed. In the Jessica Lunsford case, John Cooey, her perpetrator, she was his third victim. Third victim. You just had a case in New York a couple days ago. I think it was in yesterday's paper. Babysitter allegedly charged with raping a 10-year-old girl. He's a convicted sex offender. We're too lenient in our hope to try to see the best in people, and so sometimes our judges are too lenient, sometimes our laws are too lenient, and we're saying that enough is enough. This crime is serious.
Are you saying that, do you believe that New York's judges in general are too lenient? I mean, you've had success in 44 states with this model legislation.
We have, yes.
Not yet in New York, although you are pushing, and we'll get to what's in here, more about what's in here in a second. But generally speaking, because this is a Democrat-dominated state, has a reputation as a liberal state, if you will, do you believe that that is the case from the bench?
This issue, it crosses party lines. What's great about this issue is we do get a lot of support from law enforcement, from the judiciary, from lawmakers, and of course from parents and victims. It crosses party lines. Parents especially say enough is enough. We need to take care of our kids. We need your help in making sure that we're keeping our kids safe. So I wouldn't say that New York itself is to blame or any one judge is to blame or a Democrat versus Republican controlled legislature is to blame. But I do think that this issue, like every other issue, does get caught up in politics. And sometimes our nation's children lose out because of that political game.
You come up, when you say things, for example, also in here is mandatory for the sex offenders list, right, for registration. Mandatory registration for life.
Yes.
That is something that the ACLU, I'm sure, has a problem with.
They do, and in fact, we have gone up against the ACLU in just about all of the states where we have had success. We don't expect New York to be any different. What we're saying is that when you have the worst of the worst offenders, the adults who are preying on kids under the age of 13, 12-year-old little girls and little boys who can't defend themselves, when you have adults preying on them, we are saying it is time to put them in jail for the first offense, throw away the key, don't even give them the chance to be rehabilitated.
What about the issue of, now you see, not necessarily in child predator cases per se, but in murder cases and death penalty cases, you see with the advent of more and more DNA expertise, if you will, you have more states saying, okay, whoa, let's put the brakes on death penalty legislation. What if you make a mistake on a first offense, you lock up a person and throw away the key?
Well, you need to make sure you have a good case. The benefit to having this type of law in place is it's one more tool in an arsenal of many tools that prosecutors would have. If they feel that they have a strong case and that they can show that that adult was preying on a young child, then yes, we need to get them off of our streets, because we know that type of crime has a very high recidivism rate. If they don't have the evidence, charge that person under something else. We're not saying every case is the same. We recognize that there are differences in different cases. It's also one reason why we have also lobbied to make sure that registration requirements include true sex offenders. We don't want the person who sometimes is urinating in public, who this has happened, gotten caught up in the sex offender registry, and now they're a registered sex offender.
Or consensual sex for teenagers.
Or consensual sex for teenagers. We're taking that issue completely off the table. We recognize that happens. We also recognize that that is not a sex offense. That is not an adult preying on a kid.
What about this issue of sexting and sending pictures and things that, obviously we've just seen in New York this huge political scandal. We've seen it a couple of times, actually. But this idea of you have kids who send cyberbullying, if you will. How do you separate that out?
Well, you do need to separate that out, and you need to look at a lot of education. It's also one reason that my organization looks to work with schools, with PTAs, with parents to make sure that they are understanding what their children are doing online, and working with kids themselves to make sure that they're not harming one another. We actually were just at the White House last week accepting an award through the Department of Homeland Security for a PSA that we produced that talks about the importance of preventing cyberbullying and promoting good behavior online. We know that our teens are going to use technology. We want to encourage them to do so, but we also want to make sure they're safe online.
You do not yet have a sponsor for this bill in New York, is that right?
We do not, no. What we have started doing this time around is talking to groups like the DAs and the DA Association. We're reaching out to individual lawmakers. We're reaching out to law enforcement, people who we think we can get on our side so that we can have a good coalition, a broad-based coalition, to then go to the legislature as a whole and look for sponsors and get a bill.
What's your thought about where the governor might stand on this? Because you're talking about a person who in his prior life was very pro-drug law reform. And it seems to me, even though predators, obviously, and drug law is totally different, but when I asked the question regarding too liberal from the bench, that's what sparked the whole 1970s very strict backlash, if you will, against the judges, right? And took away judicial discretion.
We're not saying take away judicial discretion. We're saying give prosecutors, give the judiciary another tool in certain extreme instances. We hope that we will have the governor's support. There was someone from the governor's office today at the DA's meeting. I have information before her, and I'm hoping that we can reach out and work with the governor.
Do you believe predators and people who are guilty of sex crimes can be rehabilitated?
I don't. I have looked at stacks of studies taller than I am. I was giving testimony in Vermont just a couple of years ago, and this very question was asked. Now, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not trying to pretend to be one. But I have looked at the studies. There are the rare instances where someone can be rehabilitated. But this is a type of crime. It's not about sex. It is about power. It is about control. It is about dominance. And there is a perversion with people who think that a young child is sexual or some fantasy in nature. And we need to make sure that we are protecting those kids from those perpetrators so that they don't have the opportunity to try to lure them in. The Jessica Lunsfords of the world, as horrific of a case as that is, Megan Kanka just across the border in New Jersey, a stranger abduction, it's important to remember that that is anomaly. That is a very small percentage of the cases that happen. It's what gets the media's attention because they're so horrific. But in the overwhelming majority of cases, the victim knows their perpetrator. It's a parent, it's a teacher, it's a coach, it's someone that they know. They have been groomed. There's a process involved in it. And it's why it's so scary for a child to come forward.
Well, Obviously, this is something that's in the news at the moment, and I'm sure we'll be following it more. But I want to thank you very much, Stacey Roman Knapp, for coming by. It's good to see you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Very nice.
Excellent.
Thank you.